Hi everybody, it is Julie. Welcome back to Pages and Pens. Today I am here with the introduction to a new podcast. This is When Can You Call Yourself a Writer? And this is a question that I've asked myself forever. It's a question that I got a lot when I was working at the magazine from people that were writing like blog posts for us, like, can I call myself a writer now? I was really excited to bring this question to Abel and to Amber and to talk about it in the podcast. I hope that you guys will also discuss it down in the comment section below. Check out the podcast at all of the different podcast areas. They'll all be linked down below. Also check out Amber and Abel. I hope that you guys are having a fantastic week. And for now, let's get into a discussion about when to call yourself a writer.
Hey everyone, welcome to the 4th episode of the Writer's Block. Today we are going to be talking about when can you officially call yourself a writer. Today's topic will be moderated by Julie and the video will be on her YouTube channel, so check the link out below in the description. So Julie, why don't you take it away and get us going with this topic?
Awesome. So I kind of wanted to take it back like all the way to the beginning and just have a discussion on when do you get to call yourself a writer? Like at what point in your career, in your writing journey, do you get to like own the title of writer? Because I think way too many people shy away from owning it and using it as an identifier because they don't think that they deserve it yet or they haven't earned it yet. So I wanted to get your guys' opinions on it, and this was like a last minute subject change, so I don't know how you guys feel. So I would love to know what you guys think. When can you officially call yourself a writer? And then maybe tell us a little bit about when you first identified as a writer. You want to start us off, Abel?
Yeah. So I like the topic. I've always struggled to call myself a writer, even after, 3 books, almost 4. I still, when people ask like, hey, how's your writing going? Like, I get very anxious and I'm like, oh my God, I'm not a writer. Don't talk to me. Like, I don't do that. But I've felt a little bit comfortable talking about being a writer after my first book was published. Only because before that, I talked about recently one of our other episodes how I would write a lot and then I would go back and re-edit it as I went on. So my first book took me like almost 5 years to write. So I didn't really want to call myself a writer back then because I felt like I was more, I don't know. I feel like it was, I really don't know. I feel like I had an idea. I just didn't know where it was going, and I didn't have a plan. I didn't know what to do after I was done with the book. But I feel like after I held my first book, I was like, I am a writer. But yeah, even now, like I said, when people ask me, hey, how's your writing going? Or are you a writer? I heard you're a writer. I'm like, oh my God. No, I'm not. That happens quite a lot with my employees at work. They're like, hey, sir, I heard that you wrote books. I'm like, oh my God, who told you that? And yeah, so I get very awkward. But Amber, when did you feel like you started calling yourself a writer?
I don't think I've ever felt like I can call myself a writer, to be honest, because there's within certain groups of people, if they're writer people or book people, I'm like, yeah, I write, I'm a writer. But in real life, you better not ask me. I'm like, I don't write. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because I feel like they come at you when you say, I write books. Well, what kind of books do you write? And I'm like, well, that's complicated because I write in multiple genres, and I don't want to tell them, like, my first book was a vampire porn, so it's weird. And then they say, when can I read it? Is it in the bookstore? And, well, so, yeah. As far as writer, in certain situations, like I said, I do call myself a writer, but I've never, ever called myself an author. So I think that's the difference.
Yeah. So for me, we're gonna circle back around to some of that stuff. For me, I think I really, really took control and ownership of being a writer when I had the Indie Chicks, when I had the online magazine, and when I was writing for more than just my own personal blog, which is crazy because even when I was blogging, I had a decent following. People were still reading it. People were still signed up for my feed. So at that point, as somebody who was putting out content on a schedule, then I'm a writer. Like, if there's people out there, for me, if there's people out there that were reading what I was writing, then I was a writer. but I do want to specify that the way that I define writer for myself and the way that I tell other people to define writer are very different things. So I definitely started identifying as a writer when I was at the Indie Chicks. And for me, like you, Amber, that caused a lot of issues, because you do get like, oh, where do you write? Where can I find your writing? Where can I do this? I'm like, oh, we have an online magazine. We have like X amount of, unique visitors every month, and da-da-da. Like, it was a very successful online magazine. And then they're like, oh, but you're not in print. And I'm like, no, not right now. And then we were in print, but it was like, oh, you're only... this is crazy, but we got this like, oh, you're only in Barnes and Noble and Books A Million. Like, I can't get you at the grocery store. And I'm like, no. Do you know how hard it is to get your magazine at Barnes and Noble? Like, no, I'm not at the grocery store. I'm sorry. I'm not with the tabloids. I'm not with like next to Cosmo. We're not there yet. Like, but you can walk into a Barnes and Noble and buy my magazine. Like, does that not mean anything to you? You publishing plebeian? Like, it's hard to do. So yeah, I definitely claimed that for myself very proudly while I was doing the Indie Chicks. And then I have claimed myself as an author after self-publishing. And that brings on a whole other issue that I think we can probably get to, is like, when can you call yourself an author? Do you have to be traditionally published? Can you be self-published? Like, I do want to get to that, but I'd also love to know really quickly what you guys think, because I get a lot of people that come to me, especially after my newsletter, and say, I really never owned my identity as a writer. I didn't want to talk to people about it. I didn't want to tell people about it, but you've really kind of inspired me to go ahead and do that. And I always tell people, if you're writing, whether your cat hears you talk about it out loud, or like nobody sees it, or everybody sees it on your blog, or you're guest writing at like websites and magazines online, or whatever it is, then you're a writer. Then you own that. If you're writing, you're a writer. So I always tell people, like, from day one, if you're writing, then you're a writer, period. Doesn't matter where it's being seen. If it's being seen, you're a writer. And then I identified and I defined it for myself very, very differently. So did you guys do that? Like, do you ever encourage people to like own the moniker of writer, even though you don't do that yourself?
Yeah, I surprisingly not, like, I do get emails, especially from my podcast listeners, and they're like, hey, I just read your book, whatever, and I've always wanted to write, but this and that. I'm like, just sit down and write, and you can call yourself a writer, because if you have an idea and you're putting it on paper, or, not on paper, but, you have a document on your computer open and you have tons of stories, you're a writer. And I do talk to people about that, but I don't ever like to call myself. I don't know what it is. I just feel like you said, like, you open up the, like, I don't know, for a can of worms for people to be like, well, is it at Barnes & Noble? I'm like, well, yeah, you can request it there. Like, they'll order it for you. Like, you can get it online at Barnes & Noble. And, well, are you at Walmart? I'm like, nobody's at Walmart unless you're a bestseller, okay? Are you at the airport? I'm like, nobody's at the airport unless you're a bestseller, okay? Like, unless you're J.K. Rowling. Like, no one's there. It's like, it's hard to get there.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I just, when people ask, like, are you a writer? I just, like, cringe. But I do get emails asking, like, hey, for advice, or, how did you tell everyone for the first time that you wrote a book? And I told a lot of people that I was writing a book, and I think a lot of people for a while were like, okay, yeah, like, that's cute, you're writing a book. But because it took so long, I think finally when I did it, everyone was like, oh my God, he wrote a book. Like, but yeah,
actually did it.
I do get emails asking me that, and I do give advice, like you said, Julie. Like, I give advice, but I can't take it, my own advice. I don't know. Amber, do you have anything with that?
Here's the thing. Like, I don't like calling myself a writer for the main reason of I don't want to answer questions about my writing, because they come at you with, what is your book about? And
I hate that.
It's ridiculous, because it's hard to explain. I don't even know fully yet what it's about, and I don't know. I'm a pantser, so I'm like, I don't know what my book is about. But I do encourage other people, like, hey, you write a blog, you're a writer. Which, interestingly enough, I actually felt more like a true writer when I was blogging than I do now, which is weird, because it's kind of the opposite of how I should feel. But I don't know. I was writing more often then, I think. I don't know.
Well, I think that both are very valid writing. But I think that blogging, you write something, you put it out, you get like almost immediate verification and acknowledgement of that work. Whereas when you're working on a novel, it's you for so long, and it's such a long process before anybody else sees it to validate the fact that you wrote, that it's like, it's hard to kind of get over that. And I went from having like daily validation of like, oh my gosh, this is a great article, thank you so much, it really connected with me, to being like, I've worked on this book by myself with nobody to tell me if it was good or not for so long that I just want to scream, like, this is so difficult. So I understand that. I can understand why blogging would feel a little bit more valid than writing a novel and not having that feedback right away. But you guys both hit on the same topic of not wanting to call yourself a writer, or like not knowing what to do when people mention that they've read your work. And I find that so interesting because I know I'm not alone in it, but it gives me what I like to call my fear face, where I'm just like, oh, you did? Oh, okay. That's great.
Totally.
Thank you. Thank you for supporting me. Like, oh my gosh. And I get like tweets and DMs on Instagram and all these things of like people with my book, and they're like, they are unbagging it and unboxing it, and they're like, guess what just came? I can't wait to dive in. And I have a panic attack. Like my chest caves in on itself, and I'm like, oh, this is how it ends. This is how it all comes crashing down. Like, why did I do this? Why did I ever do this? And I know that I think it's so weird, but like I self-published that first book without thinking that anybody, like, with the hope and dream that everybody would read it, but also like realistically thinking no one would, and then people do, and I like I panic. I absolutely panic. But I do claim to be an author, and I do claim to be a writer. I still hate when people ask me where they can buy my book and then like give me that face when they're like, oh, it's online. Like, or when I get the like, oh, who are you? Who published you? And I'm like, I did. So I get it, but I do think it's important to acknowledge that you're no less a writer or no less an author, no matter how you publish, no matter how you write, no matter what platform you're on. For me personally, that's how I feel. It's not always easy to like own that, but I do think that's true.
I get that same fear when someone is telling me that they bought my book or that they read my book. So when I wanted to read your book, Julie, I knew that you would feel the same way I did. So I didn't tell you that I bought it. I didn't tell you that I was reading it. I waited until I was finished to even put it on Goodreads, because like I didn't want you to feel that like, oh my God, what is she going to think about it? Because we were such good friends. I was like, I'm going to wait until I love it, and then I'll tell her about it.
Yeah, anytime someone, like a few of my listeners, they like, hey, we just bought your book, and they were, a few days later, they're like, oh my God, what's going to happen next? I'm like, I don't know. I haven't wrote the book yet. Like, I don't know what's going to happen next. You're stressing me out. Quit it. Like, thank you for listening. Thank you for reading it, but I don't know what's going to happen. I just want to like close all the blinds in my windows and like turn off all the lights and hide in bed. They're like, oh my God, it was so good. Or, you know, how, you know, what's going to happen next? Or, hey, I love this character and this character. I'm like, oh, me too. And they're like, oh, and, you know, are they going to be together forever? I'm like, I don't know. Quit stressing me out. Like, I can't deal with the stress. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know, like, you know, like, as you know, like, you might have an idea what's going to happen in your head, even if you plot it, which will be a later episode, you might have an idea what's going to happen, but when you get to an actual scene, it can go completely left, and all shit's, you know, everybody's dead all of a sudden, and you don't even know. You know, like,
what do you mean he dies? You're like, oh,
where did that come from? Oh my God.
no.
Yeah, and so when people are like, yeah, I read your book, I'm like, oh my God, why did you do that? But at the same time, I'm like, thank you so much. And, you know, we talked about building an author platform last time, and we talked about putting your book out there, and as much as we can do that, it's like when they actually do it, you're like, oh, why?
No, I'm sorry.
I immediately regret telling you anything.
just keep it on your bookshelf.
And I know Amber knows this because I've been in pure panic mode, but I decided, like, after building my author platform, being really, really transparent with follows my writing journey, and I was like, I'm doing really good. I'm on like third draft edits of like book one. I'm getting ready for beta readers. I'm this, I'm that. And I sat down the other day and I was like, I hate book one. And I'm like, I panicked and I decided like I'm scrapping it, like not fully, but like I'm doing a complete like rewrite. I'm going to come at it from a completely different angle. And a part of that is really difficult because I have built an author platform and I've been really transparent with my writing process and people were really excited for it and they were getting amped for it. And I felt pressure and I'm like sitting here and I was like, all my Insta stories and I was like, who am I kidding? Like, I'm not George R.R. Martin. I am not, like, nobody's waiting for this. Like, I need to calm down. I'm stressing myself out. But it's nerve-wracking. I don't think it gets any less nerve-wracking when you share your work ever. Like, I panicked when I had articles at the magazine, and I panicked when I put out a book, and I panic every time something happens, you know? Like, it's just like, please like it. But I don't think... I think there's such value in making yourself vulnerable enough to feel that way and to get feedback on your writing. But I do want to stress to people that are listening that, like, that process of actually, like, sharing is not, that's not the definer of whether or not you get to claim being a writer. Like, you can still be a writer without sharing your work. I think it's a sin. I think that your work should be shared. I think it takes on new life and, like, such beauty when it's shared, even if it's terrifying. But not sharing it doesn't mean you're not a writer.
Yeah, I agree. I think that any kind of artist, right, because writing is an art, a form of art. I think any kind of artist is scared to share their work, you know, because you have it, it's all yours, and it's, you know, whether it's perfect or not to you, it's just like you're the only one that can have an opinion about it. And then when you release it to the world, it's like, oh my God, everyone, you know, it's just like when we create these podcasts, the first few, I think the first one, we were like hyperventilating, or like, I was like, oh my God, it's hot in my room. Like all these lights are burning my face. Oh my God. And that's because I record podcasts almost every week, you know, but this was different for me. I think anytime you put something out there, you're like, oh my God. But, yeah, like you said, I think that even if you are a writer and you're afraid to tell anyone about it, you can create a pen name. Create a pen name and put it up on, you know, there's tons of websites that you can have. I don't know I know that there's one named Chanillo, because I used to be on it. But I don't know of very many others, but you can put your series up on websites and have people read it there. And there's a lot of people that are very successful and they're strictly on websites like that. And so, yeah, if you don't want to publish traditionally, or you're just afraid your writing's not good enough, just share it with the internet for a little bit and hide behind a screen and a pen name, and there you go. I kind of wish, looking back, that my first book was written under a pen name, just because your first book is never your best book. No one's like.
Same.
Right, you know. I kind of wish that my first book was under a pen name, just so I could have that, you know, write out the mistakes. And even now when I'm writing, I'm like, oh, I'm so much better. I'm not even that great yet. I'm not even that great yet, but I am better. And I'm like, I cringe. And I'm like, I want to take the book off the market to edit it again and re-put it out there, but I'm like, it's also where I was with my first book at the time, so it's kind of true to in its nature to leave it out there. And yeah, I just think that, like you said, if you have writing, the world deserves to see it and hear from you, if it's music or whatever kind of art form it is.
Yeah, you know, in any kind of art form, but especially with writing, when you come up with a story, you come up with a story in your brain, and you have a superficial story in mind that you want to tell. You know, what would happen if this person got hit by a car and suddenly had to go on this new quest to find themselves? That's very superficial. But when you actually write the story, a great story has to come from deep down within your soul. And so whenever you finish it, you have bared open a piece of your soul. And now you're telling people, here, read, judge my soul. And that makes us feel so dirty and weird. And, you know, and like, we don't want them to know that part of our soul and how we truly feel, like, especially like poetry and things like that. You know, it's just, it's hard. And any artist will tell you that, you know.
Yeah, but there's a beauty in it. And I've talked about this a lot during, you know, my time on many different platforms. The power of ownership and the power of a word. And I honestly do believe that so much changed for me and the way that I viewed writing and the way that I viewed it as something that it was just like fun to do, or it was just a hobby, or it was just a passion, but it was never going to be something that I was like truly good at or dedicated to, you know, like a lot changed for me just in my own mind and in my own heart when I identified as a writer. Like when I claimed being a writer, and then when I claimed being an author, and I owned that, and I wasn't afraid to tell people that, it changed how I viewed what I was doing. And it made it not more work, less fun, but it made it feel like time well spent, as opposed to like, oh, this like fun thing that I do that like keeps me from going out with like friends some nights. It's like, no, I'm a writer, so I write, you know, like I can justify taking the time, and I can justify, you know, whatever actions I need to take to carve out that time for myself, because that's who I am. Like, I'm a writer, I'm an author. This is a part of my identity. And I think until it's a part of your identity, it's always like this, not like a secret or not like a shame, but like, there's such power in the pride that comes with that label that I think it's a shame to deny yourself that. And I don't think you realize how powerful it is until you do, even if it's scary to have to like then have those conversations with people when you admit that you're a writer and author. Like, it's worth the discomfort, because the good reactions you get and like the personal empowerment and like just rightness in your soul when you say, I'm a writer, I'm an author, is like so beautiful. It's the closest I will ever get to coming out, is basically what I'm getting at. Like, it's just like, here's who I am. Like, please accept that this is who I am. Like, this is me. Like, I am a writer. I'm an author. Like, that's who I am.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've had this moment. I'm sure you both have, but it's like when you're writing and it's like 2 a.m. You're writing, and like you're in the middle of a scene, and I'll be there, and I'm literally like laughing. I'm laughing at things like some of the conversations my characters are having. I'm like out loud laughing about it. I'm like typing and like laughing. Or there's even been a scene that, you know, like tears are falling down my eye when I'm typing, and I'm like, I can't believe I just did that, or I can't believe, you know, I hate her. I can't believe she just said that. And I get so, I think that's like when Amber was saying it's a piece of your soul. It literally is. Like, these characters are in your head, and they're yours. They're like your children. And I go through, like, when it's a funny thing, you're there with them and you're laughing. And when it's intense, you're there, you're biting your nails with them. You're like, oh my God, this is very intense right now. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. And I think that's why a lot of writers are hesitant to share their work and then call themselves a writer. I think, yeah, I feel like if we kind of took ownership of that and said, like, yeah, I'm a writer, and we'd probably, I think the more we said it, we'd be a little bit more comfortable with answering those questions. Like, oh, well, what do you write? You know, I kind of just, I've kept it very short. Like, I already have like answers. I'm like, oh, you know, I write fantasy. You know, oh, okay. Mm-hmm. Like, what kind of fantasy? I'm like, bitch, I write fantasy. Like, you know, like, don't ask me. But I have very short answers. I think, I don't know. It's just, I think Amber was saying it's a part of your soul, and I feel like just when you're sharing this thing that's been in your head for I don't know how long, like I have a story that I haven't even written. I just know the name to the first book because I know what it's going to be about. Like, I have this story in my head. It's been in my head for like 3 years, and I haven't written it yet, but like I'm so anxious to write it, and I'm so like, I'm already scared to share it with the world, and I haven't even written the first word. And I'm already like, oh my God, you know, I'm like hyperventilating just thinking about it. Like, but yeah, I wish that I felt more comfortable calling myself a writer, but I don't know if anyone, you know, when does a musician call himself, you know, I'm a music artist? I don't know. When does that happen? You know?
Speaking of writing at 2 a.m., Julie knows this about me, but you don't know this about me, Abel, and of course, listeners don't know this about me, is I'm a very visual learner and a visual person, so it's literally a movie inside of my head. I write at 2 a.m. with my eyes closed, and I just turn off everything else, and I just write with my eyes closed, and I laugh, and I cry, so I probably look kind of crazy sitting there with my eyes closed typing and just being like, oh, I mean, I don't want anybody to ever see that.
Yeah. You know what's helped me lately is listening to music scores, like movie scores, and the Black Panther, the Wakanda score. Oh my God, the music in that, and it's just like it's so dramatic and it's intense and it sounds foreign and it's just like so much is happening and I'm just there. Like I was at the airport last week and I was just typing and then it was like a really sad part and like I switched scenes or whatever and I'm like getting emotional and sad and I'm just like, oh my god. And but music scores have really helped me lately. So just threw that out there. When Amber was saying she looked crazy, I probably look crazy just as much.
And no joke, I've killed characters because I was listening to like Marilyn Manson while I was writing. And I'm like, let's just kill them all. And I was like, maybe I should change the channel.
Now you die, yeah.
slash.
I've done that after a day of work.
Yeah, no kidding. But I think you know when you're a writer. Like I think you know when it's something that you're called to, when it's something that like you can't sleep at night, or you can't get a story out of your head, or there's characters that are just talking to you, or like for me, even before I had quote unquote characters that spoke to me, it was just like that's how I dealt with depression or mental health or just a bad day. Like I would sit down and write. To me, that is like a qualifier. Like if there's are you a writer checklist, it's like, do you write? Yes, then you're a writer. But also like, do you write when you're sad or happy or need a release? Or like, do you have characters that are dancing around in your head that need attention? Like, do you daydream all the gosh darn time and like have to get it down on paper? Like there's so many ways and there's no right or wrong way to be a writer. And I think I just really wanted to like encourage everybody, especially because I'm struggling right now with my story and I'm struggling right now to consider myself a successful like writer who's like actually knows what they're doing. Like, because I just feel like I'm floundering with this book. Like I needed this episode to remind myself that there is no right or wrong way to be a writer. So long as you're writing, you are a writer. Does not mean that you have to have a bestseller. Does not mean that you need to be traditionally published. Doesn't mean you have to be self-published. It doesn't mean you have to even share your work. But if you're feeling called to write like that, then you're a writer. And I encourage you, and I know it's difficult, but I encourage you to try to claim that, even if it's just with like a friend or a family member or a small circle of people that you trust to like know that you really identify with this passion of yours. So just like try owning it. Like it's uncomfortable at first, but like try owning it. Like, what do you do? Oh, I'm a writer. Like try it out on first date. What do you do? I'm a writer. Like just do it.
Yeah.
Just try it.
And one thing I think is helpful to remember is that when not to compare yourself to other writers, because just because they can call themselves a writer and you're not quite to their level doesn't mean you're also not a writer. Because when you look at these authors that have these great debut novels like, you know, The Wicked Deep and Ember in the Ashes and Children of Blood and Bone, those are awesome. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's the first book they've ever written. It's just the first book that they happen to get published. So just because you have it published and just because maybe your first novel that you've ever written is not up to the, you know, Children of Blood and Bone level or The Hate You Give, doesn't mean you're not a writer too. It's just that you haven't taken the same path that they have.
Yeah. And like you said, and to that, like everyone, we all hear about like, oh my gosh, this debut author, like, you know, recently Children of Blood and Bone, like, oh my gosh, she came out of nowhere. Well, no, probably not. I don't think she came out of nowhere. I think she came out of a struggle from somewhere of some kind. And I'm sure this is probably her 10th book she's tried to write. And I'm sure she tried to get an agent long before Children of Blood and Bone was probably even an idea. And this just so happened to be her first breakout, you know. And I'm happy for her, because specifically that book's amazing, you know. But
so good.
It's all in timing and, you know, and not everyone's going to be on the New York Times bestseller list, but there's so many books out there. There's so many writers out there and authors that it wouldn't really be fair if everyone got a gold medal, you know. Like, just because you're not a New York Times bestseller doesn't mean you're not a great writer. Yeah,
and you don't even have to be good. You can be a real crap writer, but you're still a writer. Just own it. Like, I'm not gonna say like I'm not the best writer in the world, but I still have no problem saying that I'm a writer because it's just a part of who I am. So it's kind of just what I wanted to get to today, and in our discussion is kind of what we define as being a writer for ourselves, what we encourage other people to define being a writer, because I know those things are very, very different. And then just to really encourage anybody listening that, you know, writing and then calling yourself a writer can be two very, very different things, and that there's so much power in like owning it. I'm just encouraging people to own it, even on your bad days, even on your bad writing days, or your no writing days, or your like nothing's working out days. Like, own it. That's a part of being a writer. Like, a professional athlete doesn't have all great games. You can be a writer and still have crap writing days. Like, it's okay to still own it even on your bad days. And I just needed to hear that, so I figured everybody else might too.
Yeah, that's really good. Amber, do you have anything to add to this topic? Or I think it was really good, and like Julie, you said, it's just one of those things I think we just needed to hear. It's just a very not like in-depth topic, but we all need to be reminded every now and then.
The only thing I would love to say is, if Snooki can call herself a writer because she wrote a book about the Jersey Shore, you are a writer too.
Yeah, for real. Well,
and I read that book, by the way, just so you know. It wasn't good.
Well, that is it for this episode. Please join us on the next episode in a couple of weeks, where we're going to be talking about how to find your reader or your tribe. And that will be on my channel, and I'll be the moderator of that show. So we'll talk to you guys in a couple of weeks. Thank you for listening to the Writer's Block podcast, and we will talk to you very soon.
Bye, guys.